Cuba's future is in the hands of our president, the President of the United States. Whatever happens, the Department of War will be ready for any eventuality. We're here to talk about that today and then do some physical therapy. What do you think?
The Pentagon put Guantanamo at the center of the pressure against Cuba this Wednesday, June 10, 2026. He spoke to the troops and left a message that put Havana on high alert. The message was simple and heavy. The statement did not come in isolation. It came after military exercises in Key West, Florida, with unmanned systems and artificial intelligence. After recent movements by the Southern Command in the Caribbean, after a rare meeting between an American general and Cuban military officers at the Guantanamo border, after Díaz-Canel accused Trump of preparing economic suffocation, diplomatic pressure, and even military aggression. That's when Guantanamo becomes an urgent zone. The base stops being just an old facility on the map and starts functioning as a showcase of strength, pressure, and political messaging. Cuba complains, accuses Washington of trying to provoke social unrest, and speaks in defense, but the regime also shows fear. Because it knows that the pressure now comes from all sides: economic, judicial, military, and diplomatic. What made the Pentagon raise the stakes in Guantanamo? Why did Díaz-Canel start openly talking about intervention? How is Trump tightening the siege against the Cuban dictatorship? I'll tell you all about it in a moment. If you like this kind of straightforward and no-nonsense content, consider subscribing because we have videos like this every day. Pete Hegseth went to Guantanamo to meet with American troops and to reinforce that the Department of Defense should provide President Donald Trump with all necessary options in the face of any contingency involving Cuba. The visit was officially announced by the Department of Defense itself on June 9, 2026, with a schedule in Guantanamo and also at Central Command in Florida. The next day, on Cuban soil, Hegseth said it would be unwise for the Cuban government to try to obtain weapons capable of reaching the base or American territory. According to Reuters, he stated that Havana would be calling for a confrontation that it does not want and could not withstand. The statement carries weight because it was not made in Washington in a comfortable interview, but in front of military personnel at an American facility located inside the island governed by the communist regime. The activity in Guantanamo is connected to another important sign. Southern Command had already been showing presence and activity in the region. In April 2026, the 4th Fleet conducted the Flex 2026 exercise in Key West, Florida, integrating unmanned systems, artificial intelligence, and traditional naval platforms for maritime patrol and combating transnational criminal networks. This exercise took place a short distance from Cuba and showed that Washington is not just talking, it's reinforcing presence, command, and response in the Caribbean. The Southern Command's own website also reported in June exercises by American military personnel in Guantanamo, with continuous presence within the command's area of responsibility as part of Operation Southern Spear, aimed at combating illicit trafficking, deterring malign actors, and protecting American territory. Díaz-Canel reacted even before this new escalation became clearer. In an interview with eldiario.es, the head of the Cuban regime accused Trump of seeking to strangle Cuba in order to provoke social unrest and use that chaos as a pretext for intervention. The accusation shows the extent of the political panic within the regime. Havana tries to sell the narrative that the blame for Cuban misery is external, but Díaz-Canel's own desperation reveals that the dictatorship understands the new face. Washington is not treating Cuba as a temporary problem. It is treating Cuba as a security risk, as a source of instability, and as a dictatorship vulnerable to coordinated pressure. The Cuban regime is also trying to play the European Union and Spain against Washington. In the same interview, Díaz-Canel demanded protection for European businessmen and complained about American extraterritorial laws. The intention is clear: to turn the pressure from the United States into an international problem and to seek political protection outside the island. But the reaction comes at a time when foreign companies are already looking at Cuba with fear of sanctions, the Cuban economy remains suffocated, blackouts affect the population, and the dictatorship is losing room to maneuver. Cuba feels that it has lost its comfort zone. It no longer controls the narrative with the same ease. Reuters reported that the Secretary of State, the son of Cuban immigrants, has been treating Cuba as a national security risk because it is about 145 kilometers from Florida. This changes the weight of the debate. It's not just an ideological criticism of Cuban communism. It's a strategic assessment of a weak dictatorship close to American territory with a history of repression allied with hostile regimes and capable of causing a migration crisis if the internal situation gets out of control. Rubio and General Francisco Diaz, these Donovans, had already appeared in May in front of a map of Cuba during conversations about threats to security, stability, and democracy in the hemisphere. For Vanna, this kind of image is political poison. For Washington, it's a sign of priority. Guantanamo gains more importance because it's not just a base. It's a permanent point of American presence inside Cuba, right in front of a dictatorship that now feels surrounded. That's why Rex Hegseth's statement has such an impact on Havana. When he says he hopes for a positive relationship with Cuba, but at the same time warns that the Department of Defense will give Trump all the necessary options, the political message is clear. The diplomatic door exists, but it isn't the cheapest option. Military pressure exists, but it doesn't need to be announced as war. The base exists, the troops are there, the exercises take place, the military meetings happen, and the Cuban dictatorship knows that every move is being watched. Cuba's fragility becomes even more apparent when analysts point out that the regime wouldn't have real strength to face the US military. Havana's defense relies much more on propaganda, international political costs, and diplomatic outcry than on actual military capability. The regime tries to say that it's preparing not to be caught off guard, but the balance of power is clear. It's brutally unequal. The dictatorship knows this. The Iranian regime tried to test its strength in the Middle East and received a military response. The Cuban dictatorship now sees Guantanamo in the spotlight, Southern Command in action, and the US justice system reopening old wounds. Rubio is putting the island in the security debate. And Hegseth, speaking in front of the troops, says that Cuba shouldn't play around with weapons capable of reaching the base or American territory. It's not an isolated gesture, it's a set of signals. Díaz-Canel tries to turn everything into an accusation against Trump, but his reaction confirms that the dictatorship is uncomfortable. The regime admits that it feels the impact of this strategy. I'm Milson Alves, Global, and my purpose is to keep you well informed with the truth every day. The news links are in the video description. Like this video, subscribe, and check the comments at the end to engage more with the Milson Alves community.